So just a minute ago, I was checking the official Elden Ring Nightreign website, and I found something kind of strange. I found that the patch notes had been updated, and there was a fresh new set of them. So obviously with no tweet or anything like that. I thought that's weird. They just, shadow dropped a patch note. I read through them all of it, and then suddenly, after I read through all of it, they took out the patch notes, which I think was really weird. Maybe they're not ready to be, released yet. Maybe it'll be in a few weeks. But I did read all of them, and I memorized the patch notes, and I've written them down to the best of my memory. Some things might be a little bit different to what the final patch notes might be, maybe because of my memory, or maybe because they, changed something between now and when they release the patch notes. But I've written down what they said, and to the best of my memory. And I'm going to break down the patch notes right here, right now. I'm very excited to see some new content from this game. Okay, so Wilder. The Great Sword moveset is now 3% slower, which is a really weird change, I must say. I think his moveset was pretty good. I didn't think he needed slowing down, but it's only 3% slower, so it's not really a huge deal. I'm sure it won't make that much of a difference. The Wilder now has a 15% chance of falling over when using the grapple to pull himself. This will cause damage, and the damage will be different depending on the terrain. If he slips hard on a surface like rock, he will take more damage than if he slips on grass or sand. This is really interesting nerf. I didn't think that his grapple was, a pretty mid ability in the game, I'd say. It wasn't particularly good, but it wasn't completely useless. It did make him pretty fast, but now with this 15% chance, I don't think that people will be using Wilder to be traversing a lot anymore, just because if you have a 15% chance you fall over, not only will you damage yourself, but it will also probably cause you a little bit of time loss. So Wilder being the fastest character in the game now, when using the grapple, is no longer the case, probably because it's a bit inconsistent. The Wilder now has a 15% chance of tripping when Sixth Sense is activated, in which case the attack will go through and he will be put in a near-death state. Again, really weird nerf change, I must say. I don't think Sixth Sense needed to be nerfed. I mean, I think Wilder is always pretty good, but I don't think he was in a state where he needed to be nerfed. He was solid, he was consistent, and I don't think this 15% chance of tripping when Sixth Sense is activated really needs to happen. But I'm giving... We'll see what happens. Maybe they save it in the end. Onslaught Stake now has a 15% chance of backfiring, immediately putting him in a near-death state. Now, again, this is weird. I'd say Wilder had one of the best ults in the game beforehand. It was really good for staggering. It charged up decently quick. It did some good damage. I do have to say that this 15% chance of backfiring is not particularly I don't particularly understand their reasoning behind this. Maybe they felt that Wilder was too powerful. Now, I feel like if you played Deep of Night, you know that Wilder was pretty good, but he certainly wasn't the top dog of the game. So seeing him getting nerfed this hard is kind of interesting. There is one more note for Wilder, and it's now Wilder now has had a significant reduction in aura points. Interesting. So a Wilder nerf, I'd have to say, not particularly expected, but we will move on to the Duchess. The Duchess will now use 2% more stamina with her dodge. Yeah, 2%. Who really cares? Not that big of a deal. I mean, maybe it'll be a bit feelable, but it's 2%. It's not the end of the world. The Duchess is a very, very powerful character, so saying nerfs is not surprising, but it's a weird one to nerf. Okay. But interestingly enough, we actually see a Duchess buff here with Restage will now replay 100% of damage recorded. And this you would think would make the Duchess really powerful. 100% of damage that is inflicted on an enemy is now going to be replayed with her Restage, which makes her, super powerful. But there's a bit of a problem, which is the next one, which is Restage now replays damage that allies have received. It will also replay stamina and FP consumption during that recorded period. So basically, she just records everything now and replays it, which is interesting. I do wonder where the Duchess rankings will fall now that you can probably kill your own teammates with Restage. There is one more change, which was Finale will now no longer turn her and her team invisible, and I do think that's a bit of a nerf to a ultimate that was already not particularly great. Not that she needed a good ultimate, Restage was always the big thing about her, but without the invisibility, I think, you know, the ult will be, you know, a little bit worse. But we move on to the Guardian, but Duchess has definitely received a bit of a nerf this patch, I must say. The Guardian is now wheelchair bound after the Revenant hungrily confused his leg for a chicken wing. This significantly reduces the effectiveness of Steel Guard, as the weight of any blocked attack will push his wheelchair backwards, making guard counters miss. The Guardian has a new relic you can buy from the Jar Merchant called the Prosthetic Leg. The colour of this relic will be the one that is most inconvenient for you. Let's move on to Raider. The Raider will now have a 25% chance of starting the expedition with the Drunk status applied to him. This is interesting. Let's see what this is about. The Drunk status will now reduce damage taken by 40% and damage dealt by 20%. You will be unable to lock onto enemies when drunk, and your vision will be massively blurred. When drunk, Raider will be the only character in the game that will be unable to wield weapons with a dexterity scaling of C or above, and any weapon with any intelligence scaling. When drunk, the Raider will be the only character in the game unable to use any spells or skills. Now, this could be considered a buff in a certain way of the 40% reduced damage dealt, plus his ability. You know, if you stack some of those improved physical damage negations on your relic setup, you know, with the physical one, you know, he could be, without 40%, he could be very, very tanky, I must say. So maybe you could see this as a buff, but, you know, the lack of being able to use skills, the lack of being able to use any spells, you know, that would include Golden Vow or any, like, buffing spell. And, you know, any weapon with a dexterity scaling of C or above, or any intelligence scaling, I have to say, we'd have to test this one a little bit. To see if it actually is enough. And, you know, obviously 25% chance, you know, if you started like a double balancers Raider build, you know, and you hit that 25% chance, you know, that your entire build is wasted, you know. The Recluse will gain a damage buff depending on the sexuality of the player using her. If the player is a lesbian, Recluse will gain a damage buff to all of her attacks. If the player is anything else, the Recluse will not get a buff. I do think this is interesting, but there is a little bit more. It is now against the Elden Ring Nightreign terms of service to play the Recluse if you are a man. This will be strictly enforced, and, you know, take that as you will. You know, strictly enforced could be anything. I do think this is a good change, just so I can start playing, you know, with good Recluse players again, because there are too many bad Recluse players, and I want to play with some good ones. So this will, like, sort of, you know, reward the people who are good with her to play her more, and, you know, stop everyone who sucks ass with her. So this is interesting. I do like this change. This is a good change. I'd say this is a big buff to Recluse. Revenant, she has fired Helen. She hired the Bell-Bearing Hunter as a replacement summon. Beastclaw did not get nerfed because she did not allow it. She refused to go to therapy. She did not like the movie Toy Story. And the Revenant will now have a 100% chance of starting the expedition with the Drunk status applied to her. This somehow does not affect her ability to use spells. Moving on. Executor. The Executor is now a woman. No changes to the character model has been made. This is a good change. Moving on. The Undertaker now gets a free use of loathsome. The Undertaker now gets a free use of loathsome. The Undertaker now gets a free use of loathsome. The Undertaker now gets a free use of loathsome. The Undertaker now gets a free use of her ultimate whenever a teammate sneezes. Now this is a good buff, but I think I'll continue on to give you some context about this. Her ultimate now has infinite range, which again you might think, good buff, but wait for this. If the Undertaker misses, she will continue flying until she hits a wall. When she hits a wall, she will take damage and enter a near-death state. Now this is a pretty sizable buff, because, you know, a lot of the times you fight near walls, you fight near terrains, you fight near mountains, and hitting one as the Undertaker now kills you. So I'm not really sure what they were thinking with this one, but I'm gonna let them cook. If there is no wall to hit, the Undertaker will start orbiting the map, unable to stop flying for the rest of the expedition. Also, interesting change, you know, Undertaker's whole shtick is spamming her ultimate, and now if you miss it, you know, you're pretty much fucked. So I'm not really sure what they were thinking with this one, but, you know, there's one more. The Undertaker is unable to be fixed. You cannot fix her. Moving on. When using Analyze or Communion, the Scholar now has a 50% chance of spreading misinformation. If this happens, the enemy will receive a buff and the allies will receive a debuff. And I have to say, another interesting change, another nerf, a lot of nerfs this patch. I do think there's been a lot of interesting nerfs, and this is one of them. The Scholar being able to spread misinformation. I wonder what the lore relevance is on that, because, you know, he's kind of a smart guy. When self-buffing with Analyze, the protective bubble will now last for 30 seconds. This may seem like a buff, but let's wait for this. When self-buffing with Analyze, the player will be given a multiplication question and 5 seconds to answer it. If the player fails, the Scholar will take extra damage on the next hit instead of getting a protective bubble, and permanently lose 10 levels in intelligence. That's quite a debuff. You know, if you're using Scholar, there's a bit of a higher skill ceiling now, considering you have to be good at math. I mean, they don't specify what multiplication. It could be like 1 times 2, but it could also be like, you know, 568 times 422. So you don't really know. So if you're using Scholar, if you're a Scholar main, I do hope you are good at math. If not, you might be in for some bad Scholar gameplay. The Scholar started writing on Archive of our own, and because of that, will occasionally run into minor inconvenience during the run, such as getting hit by a car. But he did get one buff though, the Scholar can now buy pot at the merchant. I'm excited to see that at least. And then last but not least, we got Ionite, and